I started as a participant in a piece done by Eric Novak, maybe about 10 years ago, I'm going to say. Let's say 10 years ago. What's that? I'm saying 10. And then after that, I was involved in a couple other projects of my own, one of my own and then one with a collaboration with a good group of friends of mine. And then as the years went on, I also worked a lot with Dan Hurlin, and he kind of came to the time where he wanted to pass the lab on and keep it alive, and he called me up and I accepted his offer.
I found out about the lab while I was in grad school. I was lucky enough to study with Matt and Tom and Dan Hurlin, and so I heard a lot about the lab, and then ended up performing in one of the pieces last year, so I was thinking about it a lot and started thinking back on a piece I had worked on in grad school as a solo performance, and it just hadn't really worked, and I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do with it, and then started to think about it in terms of puppetry, and it became my application for the lab. And yeah, it's changed a lot since then, but I feel very lucky to have had influence from all these people.
Frank was a character that I made a long time ago, but I made him in reverse, like he was already a crazy person, and he was this character that would just introduce puppet shows with this group I did in San Francisco, and he would just come out with his "And Disney" or sign and just act crazy, and there wasn't a whole lot to him. He was just kind of funny and would introduce other little shows. And so then I was sort of wondered what his backstory was and how he sort of ended up in that situation. And I've sort of been thinking about it in the back of my mind for a couple years, and then yeah, I found out about the lab and thought that was a good place to maybe work it out.
I've gone to the lab for whatever, I don't know how long, years and years and years. So, but I did do a show in the lab a few years ago called The Jester at Tonga, and it was actually the lab that sparked the creation of Stanley for that show. Stanley is the robot, the little robot guy. And so because of just meeting once a week, it kind of keeps you going, it keeps you playing with things going in little different directions, and Stanley came out of that. So he was in the other show, and then of course he's very, you know, he can do lots of things. And so he's like, I've got to use him more and more and more. And so he became the narrator in Vanzetti in this show. And so, and I do object theater, performance, blah, blah, blah. I don't know if I'm necessarily a puppeteer, but I manipulate objects. And so this piece, Sacco and Vanzetti, I've been working on for 15 years. And I've done versions of it in Chicago with a different group called Lucky Pierre, and then with a group called Tudo and the Ragman. And so I'm still working on it. And there is a full-length show with a gallery exhibition that all of it is leading towards. And so my thought was to keep going, to keep the ball rolling. I would just concentrate on a couple scenes and use the lab again to just develop those and just get them to a point where, you know, they're done or close to this. And that was, I felt it really succeeded in doing, was, you know, just don't try to do the whole dang thing, and just do this and this, and this group was mind blowing. It was really incredible. And it was just an incredible pleasure to know every Monday you're going to be back with these folks and seeing the stuff happening, because every piece I just was really inspired by, and just a lot of great conversations are happening. So it was really a wonderful experience for the last 9 months.
I found out about the lab from seeing it. I had a friend that was in it a few years back, and I remember crying heavily throughout it and being super affected, so affected by it that a mouse that died in space was like a real issue in my life for a couple of weeks. And so I fell in love with the lab that way and had heard about it, and then the Interference and Collapse was kind of a piece we had just been toying around with for a little while before, and then it just made sense to try, because we wanted there to be miniatures and we knew that, and so it made sense to put an application together. And I feel like our application was that application that was like, we have no idea what we're doing, please let us do this. And I don't have any puppetry experience, so I just thought there's no way we would possibly get in, and then it changed my life bigger than any other artistic collaboration that I've ever been a part of, like meeting these people and getting to know them. And like my Monday nights, it's so sad. I'm gonna cry now for weeks, not about a monkey or a mouse that dies in space, but now that I won't be here every Monday night.
It's changed a little. The main kind of mission of the lab is to create an environment where the artists are completely in control, and myself and Tom are here, and the other artists are there to just kind of help them shape their voice, find their voice, but frame all of the feedback, all of the criticism, all of the conversations geared towards what the artists need and what the artists are asking for. We try to during the conversations, like Joe will show some work, and then we start off with Joe asking us a bunch of questions that he wants answered immediately. Instead of just sitting there going, oh, I really like that, or I didn't like that, or can that be more blue? We would go for really specific questions that the artist needs, and it's our goal to have the artist's needs come first. And then there's this lovely festival at the end, but it's also completely up to the artist if they want to show or not. The Puppet Lab for me is mostly about the process and just creating a really safe, solid community for these people to experiment. Typically, Tom and I get really excited about people whose application are kind of, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I want to do this. And that's kind of for us a really engaging person already. We also really like to try to get people from a diverse background and from different experiences and sometimes different countries. And we want them to all bring their diversity and share their diversity and their different kind of mental framework to give honest feedback and to spark new ideas that the artists might not have thought of on their own. A experience in puppetry is definitely not mandatory at all. I think the only thing that is mandatory is that you have graduated and have made some sort of work or some sort of writing or published something somewhere in the past. And then when we go through the applications, we've started also doing interviews, and we're also just really interested that these people who want to be here are not here to do a show at St. Anne's Warehouse. They're here to be part of a community, and that they're open and accepting of feedback and accepting of change and ideas, and also encouraging other people with honest, clear feedback. I think that's about it. So, in the lab, it's definitely I've spent a lot of time developing the actual objects. We unfortunately don't have a shop that we can offer, but we do, Tom and I definitely spent, if you, like Retta, for example, brought in a jar and some wooden dowels, and we spent about half an hour just figuring out all the different ways to put those two things together, and then how to make the joint that would work, or how to make this hinge, and then everybody kind of chimes in, and then Joe usually comes in with the final brilliant bit of engineering that everybody goes, oh my god, that's incredible. So we do spend a lot of time building, but I think for Tom and I too, there's a certain point where you can build to the very last minute, and then you're thrown into a tech rehearsal and everybody freaks out. And also to make it a little bit easier for the tech team, halfway through the process we kind of do a midterm showing where you have to show at least 2 minutes of material up on its feet with no technology, but a puppet there, your puppeteers are there, and things are moving around through scenes. So we try to, give you the time that you need to develop it, but at the same time, I think another important job that Tom and I have are to kind of become editors and to remind you that this is not a final show at all. This is just, it's much better to perform 2 minutes of a really solid idea than 20 minutes of a bunch of random, messed up, not fully thought out ideas. So we really try to, without saying, no, you can't do this, but with saying, why don't you just really focus on what you know and flush that out and give yourself the mental space to really focus on just a scene. And that's, I think, what's really great about this lab. It's not a big final show. It doesn't get reviewed. It's just a first step.
I guess in the beginning, the pigeoning, there was a whole lot more going on, and I sort of tried to cram a bunch of stuff in and try to like fill each moment in each scene with all of these different characters and things happening, and there were simultaneous things happening on stage, and I felt this need to sort of like fill every moment with something, and it kind of wasn't really working. And then I brought Frank into the lab one day, and we just like sat there and had him just breathe for a while and just kind of look around and realized that that was actually more interesting than having, and then he does this, and then he does this, and then so-and-so comes in, and like, after we sort of did that, and we like just played with him breathing, and then played with just like building his level of discomfort from like 0 to 10, and just with his breath and just with the way he was moving, and kind of realized that was more interesting than what I was trying to do, and so threw everything out that I had done and kind of just started again from that. And I think that definitely like changed everything, just slowing everything down and simplifying everything and realizing that it's actually quite okay to have him be doing nothing. There's this need to like always, the puppets on stage, to always like have it be moving around, but it doesn't have to be moving around to be alive. And that was kind of an important realization I probably wouldn't have figured out on my own.
I was doing the series of objects in no particular order, right? And it is a series of objects in no particular order. So in that suitcase, there's probably 6 more things that I didn't do that you could have seen if I would have grabbed it. And one of them was a hat. And I show a picture of a hat, and when I originally did it, I showed the picture of the hat. And I said, this is Sako's cap. And then I throw it away. And then we were discussing it, and then I said, can I tell you the true story about that hat? And they said this, so I'll do it right now. So this is a hat. Sako had a cap. This was a hat. I'm showing you a picture of a hat. I'm showing you a projection of a picture of a hat that I copied from a book of a miniature replica of a hat from a different crime scene. I'm using it to represent Sako's cap, because Sako's cap was found by a security guard the day after the crime, after hundreds of people had walked through the crime scene, and he put it in his office for a few days, and then he gave it to the sheriff, who stuck it in the back of his car and forgot about it, then found it underneath the chair, underneath the seat, and then he proceeded to rip the lining, looking for like a laundry mark or initials or some kind of identification. And it was that rip in the hat that connected the hat to Sako, because Sako always hung his hat at his job on a nail next to his workstation. And so all of his caps had a similar rip. And so this is Sako's cap. And I explained that to them just like that in the lab. And they said, you need to do that in the show. And that's what changed it. Instead of just showing you the picture and then going on, because each one of those objects has a story like that behind it. And I kind of had to play with how much of that do I tell and how much do I just, like Vanzetti's a fishmonger. And so I just show a couple of fish. I could go into it more, but, a little rubber fish, so.
For me, it was really a process about figuring out the aesthetic of my piece. When I came in, I thought that I was going to use a lot more color, and similarly with Robin, I had a big script with all sorts of things that I thought were going to happen, and then the first time we started playing around with this ladder that I found, I was terrified because we realized that this scene was going to take 5 minutes with the ladder. And then I brought it into the lab and realized that it was fine, that that's as much time as we needed to take with that scene, and that was kind of going to build the aesthetic, and then everything kind of was built off of this ladder that we found. And that was really interesting. And I had no idea that I was as interested in watching puppeteers move as I became, and that really became what I focused on as a director and got excited about. So that was all a nice surprise and a growth process for me.
I feel like for us, the thing, like in the very beginning, we were like, okay, well, we're in the puppet lab, but we don't know at all how to build puppets or manipulate them or do anything with them. But we were like, since we're in the lab, we better have 1 million puppets in our show, and they better look beautiful and amazing. And I remember having a moment of shift at one of the labs, maybe the mid-lab showing, where we have to put something on its feet, where we didn't have a Sam Cooke puppet that was a full size, which we had intended to build out of fishing poles. And we didn't have it yet, and instead we just had a blazer and a sock. and we were just using that. And afterwards, when we got some feedback, they were like, don't put all this pressure on yourself to make something that is coming across already. So that was a big shift for us, was like, that things could be represented much simpler, and that we're beginners at this. And so we didn't need to make, like, I don't know, it let me breathe for a minute as well, which is funny, like all this breath stuff, but that was a big part.
Erica's a New York neo-futurist, and their aesthetic is non-illusory. You are where you are. You're doing what you're doing. And if you say something happened, it's because it happened. And we wanted to carry that into the puppetry. For us, we wanted to both use these objects, make miniatures, project them large, and sort of manipulate these spinning turntables. But we also did not want to in any way pretend that we weren't there. That we wanted to acknowledge throughout the whole piece that we were very much present.
And we did that by just talking the entire time.
My decision to have the puppeteers visible was just based on the fact that the first puppet piece that I ever saw was in this style, or I guess first puppet piece that I saw in this style was what inspired me. I saw a piece that Tom Lee did a few years ago, and seeing the relationship between the puppeteers and the puppet, and this just very fluid back and forth, you know, the puppeteers are sometimes becoming part of the landscape, was just really beautiful and touched me in a way that I've never felt about objects before and things that are inanimate. And so that just was what kind of was my entryway into the art form. And ever since then, I still enjoy watching other forms of puppetry, but this is the one that really speaks to my aesthetic, I think.
It's also just happenstance with this group. At least I know other folks who do straightforward puppetry stuff and beautiful stuff, you know, and that stuff is just as wonderful. It's just this group, but also there is that kind of philosophical argument, not argument, or discussion about, you know, the manipulator being there and like, what is the show about? Is the show about this, or is it about the relationship, or the Uber, the meta story? Which story are you trying to tell? And it's nice, if you're there with the puppets, then you can sometimes, you know, fluctuate between the different stories, which is, you know, just another tool you can use, so.
I mean, I personally would like, for the pigeoning, for the puppeteers to disappear as much as possible. But at the same time, we still include like our real hands sometimes to be Frank's hands. And so yeah, it's fun to sort of play with that. But I definitely like hiding our faces. But if they weren't wearing their hoods, you would see that they're like making all of Frank's faces. Yeah. Like they are like, their faces are like in agony, and they're like sighing and weeping, and I can hear them from back there. They're like panting and stressed out, and that's kind of great. But hopefully by hiding their faces, it gets channeled through Frank. So. I'd really like to do a longer pigeoning, a full-length version of it. So yeah, I'm working on that. I mean, I'll take a week off, but but yeah, I would really like to. There's more to the story, I think.
I think for us, there was the story for us is just, that was one of the things that we did in the lab, was to try and find what part of the story we can't tell, and we do want to try and make a full-length piece out of it, because part of the inspiration for the alternate universes and the alternate possibilities was that Sam Cooke's death, which we only touched on a little bit as far as like the sort of sketchy circumstances of the whole thing. Sam Cooke's death was really strange, and it was hard to believe the story that actually got fed to the media and all of that he would have showed up there at that time. Kind of, he's got like this weird broken hand. They don't know how it happened, but nobody looked into these things. Nobody looked into all the money that disappeared. Nobody looked into, like, there are all these other possibilities of the way that Sam Cooke actually died. And so there's that, and then just the larger story of of these, just expanding on this idea, because in the end, we wound up funneling a lot of ideas down to what wound up being, for us, really a small piece, because we had so much that we were kind of trying to work with. But that's really what, in the end, I think we would like to develop a piece that included a little more Sam Cooke.
And I want to be in the pigeoning too. That's what I want to do also.
I'm going to do a full-length version of it. Vallejo at PS122, we talked about a while ago, so hopefully at some point it will be there. What I'm going to concentrate on now is I'm going to jump away from the performance and go to the gallery exhibition, and I'm going to build a diorama, an animatronic thing where you put in a quarter and the whole crime happens. So you can see the crime happening, and put in little tiny video cameras from where all the witnesses were, so you can see what they saw when the crime happened.
My composer and I have been talking a lot about what is next for this piece, and I think we both agree that we just kind of use the lab to create a solid sketch of what we want the piece to eventually be, and now we'd love to play with the structure of it and really kind of use what we've created as the script, and then go in and flesh it out and direct it in a different way and add to it and find scale play moments and other puppet things to do and play with. So that's where we're headed.
Say that if anybody's interested in applying to the lab, definitely sign up on the mailing list outside, and every September is usually the deadline. It's, I believe, mid-September. Please apply if you're interested, and it's basically just a brief description of what you think you want to do or what you're interested in doing, a little bit of history about you and your collaborators, and then the next lab, which will hopefully be next October, will be hopefully just as strong as this one.